Today we're going to take a look at the Anbernic RG406V and talk about why this might be one of the most important Anbernic handhelds this year and maybe what some of its shortcomings are. Let's get started. Alright, so I don't want to spend a ton of time today talking about specs or performance. You already know that this has the T820 chipset, and from the RG556 and the Cube, we largely know what that is capable of, so just keep that in mind. Maybe take a look at those reviews if you want to get detailed performance statistics. But what I want to talk today is the specifics of the hardware here and what new things Anbernic has brought to the play and how those are important and what things might hold back this handheld. So let's jump straight into one of my favorite parts to test, which is the controls. Let's start, why not, with the best thing about this device, and that is these joysticks. So they are a full range of motion. They are actually a square output, which we don't see very commonly in handhelds these days, which is good for certain emulators that might take advantage of that. Otherwise, you might want to tweak dead zones within the emulators if you want a more traditional circular output. But most importantly, if you can see here, there are no cardinal snapping issues as we saw in the Cube or the 556, and there's basically no dead zone. We can play with these, they recenter nicely, we can accurately tweak them around, and they return to center. Don't move a whole lot, maybe a tiny bit when pressing in L3 and R3, but better than performance we've seen on some of the INEO devices that either have a really large dead zone or a little bit of a fiddly center. They've actually got the joystick tuning pretty dang good on this handheld. So right off the bat, these joysticks, Anbernic, if you're watching, don't use any other sticks than these for the rest of the handhelds you have. And in fact, let's compare something here. I have the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro. Now, if you'll take a look, these pop off, and this pops on or not. That's embarrassing. This pops on if it would go. Okay, that pops on, and let's try to not screw that up so much. That pops on. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that there's a pretty good chance that these are maybe even the same joystick modules, because they do use that exact same keying. And I don't know if you can see it here on camera. Let's see if we can get it to focus. It's sort of a, there we go, an oval with squared sides there. And I don't think I've seen that on anything other than the Retroid, maybe AYN sticks. So really cool to see that on those sticks. That means you can order stick toppers for the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro from Retroid and use them on this Anbernic, and in fact that's probably a little bit better feeling top. I mean, it really depends on whether you're a concave or convex type of person, but we'll pop it back onto the default sticks for the remainder of the review to be true to stock there. Moving on to some of the other buttons here, the ABXY, they're membrane, they feel good, they're not too loud, a little clacky if you really try to mash them, but you know, don't do that and you'll be fine. We've got select start down here, which is a nice place. And on the back, we've got those shoulders, the L1 and R1, L2 and R2. I know some people had complaints about the RG405 being a little bit too easy to press. I personally didn't own one, so I can't attest to that, but from what I've heard, it is better here. It's still pretty easy to press when you're on here, but depending on how you grip it, you can just avoid maybe touching those all together, and it's really not that bad at all to use. I would have loved to see analog triggers paired with the performance that we see on top here, as well as this great screen that we'll talk about a little bit later. So hopefully we'll see that in a future horizontal from Anbernic. D-pad is really lovely. I overall like this. Pretty easy to get diagonals, but if you're careful, you don't get the diagonals. Maybe it's a little on the less stiff side, so maybe could be too easy to hit diagonals. Really depends on the game. Again, as I've said in past reviews, I'm not a D-pad snob, but yep, overall, controls are pretty acceptable on here. I'm going to pivot straight into talking about the ergonomics because it kind of directly relates to the control placements on this unit. When you're playing a game that requires just the D-pad and the ABXY, L1, R1, your standard 16-bit content, in that case, it's great. It feels pretty good. It's comfortable. This nice little rounded edge here and the grips on the back feel pretty good to play. But when you start using the joysticks is when it becomes a little bit more suspect. If you're using just one joystick, you kind of can support mostly with your right hand here and then kind of claw grip it with your left hand. And overall, that's pretty comfortable. It's not too bad. I played a little bit of 3DS using that style and it wasn't too bad. But if you're gonna play a shooter game, then that's probably where it starts to fall apart, is that using both sticks is uncomfortable and your thumbs can kind of make a little bit of thumb love here. And you kind of have to do that claw grip where you just grip the insides of there, but don't really fully put your hands against the side, because that's awkward. This feels okay, but it's not as comfortable to hold it long term like that. On the flip side, if you're using just the right joystick, kind of similar, not too bad, but I think left joystick and buttons feels better than the alternate joystick options. But it's still pretty tolerable, and overall the curves of the device make it fairly comfortable, so I'm not going to give it too many marks there. It is an inherent limitation, but I still am more excited for a horizontal version of this. Talking about the other most standout feature is definitely the display on this thing. This is a welcome addition, and I'm personally a snob and don't really care for 4-inch 480p screens. I actually recently picked up a 405M, and that's a system that's been out for a while, and I almost immediately resold it to a friend because I just couldn't jive with only 480p resolution at the 4-inch screen size. Here we have 960 by 720, so we have a really nice bump. I think that's about 50% in the resolution category, and everything just looks really crisp and nice. And paired with the fact that this is a pretty vibrant looking, if you can see the colors there, they do pop pretty dang good. Like, look at this red here on that Atari splash screen. It is pretty nearly as vivid in real life as it is on the footage here. So big fan of the screen. It's crisp, it displays nicely. It is a 9 out of 10. The only thing keeping it from being a 10 out of 10 is the fact that it's not OLED, but keeping costs in line probably makes sense. And I really don't notice the fact that it's IPS unless I'm playing games with lots of dark areas or systems that have black bars on them. Another really great thing about this screen, and I'll show that off here, is just how dim it gets for an IPS. You cannot even see that on camera. I can see it right now, but you can't on camera, and that's just how dim it gets. I'll bring it up just a little bit here. See, as you slide, it gets pretty much non-existent. You can see just a little bit of those desktop icons, all the way up to a relatively bright resolution. I played this outside just a little bit yesterday while my kid was playing around and enjoying the fresh air. This is the second most important part about this device after the sticks. The sticks and the screen, I could end the review here. That's what's important about this device. That's really it in a nutshell. But while we're here, we'll talk about a few different things. What do I not like about this device? For starters, I'm going to turn the screen off here. This bezel lip, it looks gross. I don't like it. They've made other devices before that are flush. I mean, let's look here at the RG28XX. There's no bezel to catch your finger there. It's pretty much just flush with the body. But when you look at the 406V, there's that inset, and that's just a crevice for dust, finger grease if you're using the touchscreen. So really, I would love to see maybe future models get rid of that. Secondly, it's a polarizing design, or maybe not that polarizing. There's a few fans out there, but it is kind of a chunky, beefy boy, and not everybody's going to be a big fan. I really don't like it that much, but you know what? When I'm holding it and playing it, and I'm looking at the screen, kind of who cares what it looks like? I mean, right? I'm here to play the games, not to stare at this on my shelf. If you're a handheld collector and you're just going to put it on a shelf, well, then maybe this is not the most attractive piece for your collection. The other thing is I didn't get to choose this color. This was sent to me as a review unit, by the way, from Anbernic. No money changed hands. They're not seeing this video. My opinions are my own, but I did not pay for this unit. And that's the cream colorway here. And what's baffling to me is I don't mind the cream color so much, but they still stuck with a bright white on these buttons, joysticks, and D-pad. So it really kind of it doesn't sit well with the rest of the shell. It makes this just look kind of dirty. So they probably should have done all cream, or maybe chosen some other color for these buttons, or just made it a pure white. I mean, I guess it'll look a little less dirty this way, but if I was going to pick, I would probably go with the translucent black as my first pick. I'm not complaining because this is a review unit. So yeah, not my favorite color, but it is what it is. The plastic feeling is another thing. It's kind of hollow feeling. It's relatively sturdy. It's not the worst. It's not too shiny and greasy, so it's a lot better than, say, the RG556 in terms of Anbernic fit and finish. But, if there's one thing I was going to knock, it's not necessarily the most premium feeling device, between the bezel, the lips here and the plastic altogether. It feels just okay, which is fine. it's just okay. You know what? Sometimes okay is good enough. I already mentioned the other thing that I'm not a super fan of, which is using 2 joysticks is not really a super enjoyable experience here, but you know, whatever. So that's kind of it for my impressions today. This review is a little bit different than normal, as I'm not going to do a deep dive of every single game in terms of performance. I really just wanted to talk about why this device is important and maybe what holds it back. We'll show some footage of several different games. Just know that you're going to play a good majority, a fair amount of PS2 at 1x, some of it at 2x, but not all of it for sure. GameCube is going to be a little bit better experience. You're going to be able to play a reasonable amount of GameCube at 2x or maybe even 3x. Again, some titles are only going to run at 1x, or maybe even something like F-Zero GX struggles to even run at 1x. And you know what? That's just the fact of the matter that the T820 chipset has those performance limitations. But everything below, you know, PSP, PS1, Dreamcast, Nintendo 64, and all systems older than that, they're going to run like a champ, and they're going to look amazing on this 720p 4.3 screen. Again, that's my super most extra awesomest favorite part about this. Not a big fan of the Cube because 1.1 doesn't do a whole lot for me. I don't play as much Game Boy games as I do the later 16-bit Super Nintendo, Sega, Genesis, home console type stuff, so there the screen comes in nicely. Just to recap, why is this device important? To date, it is the most powerful vertical handheld. We have not seen this level of power in a vertical. Anbernic has good sticks finally. Thank goodness. Please don't go back to the old sticks. Anbernic finally has a great 4-inch screen. It looks amazing, color is great. I can't say enough about this screen. Again, it's not OLED, but I think it's pretty superb for what it is. The last bit, which is perhaps the biggest point I wanted to make in this video, is what it means for the future of Anbernic. Is with these sticks and this screen, please, Anbernic, make an RG406H, 406P, 406M, some variant there. I'd like to see something that's a mashup of the Cube and the 406V that gives us that nice horizontal form fact with this screen, these joysticks, and analog triggers. Throw all that together and you'd have a winner, because then playing PS2 and GameCube with analog triggers and a slightly more comfortable dual stick format would be 2 thumbs up from Bassderek. Okay, real quick, I wanted to touch on what some of the comparisons, what are some of the alternatives in this space as far as a vertical handheld? Well, the biggest competitor, perhaps, if you're not worried about price, is the Neo DMG, which is coming up next month. Allegedly, it is going to ship. It is a lot more powerful. With the Snapdragon G3X Gen 2, which is sort of a souped up 8 Gen 2, you know, you can run up to Switch, though I'm not sure you'd want to run that on a small 4.3 or 1.1 screen of this size. As far as GameCube and PS2, it basically means uncompromising access to those catalogs, not worrying about, is this going to run at 1x, is this going to run at 2x, am I going to have to turn on cycle skip, am I going to have to mess around with emulator settings? The answer is pretty much no. On the G3X, as long as you set the performance profile accordingly, the Neo DMG is going to play all that catalog at a resolution that is pretty much native to that screen. So if you're somebody where that is the most important thing, then maybe that's the handheld for you. But it is double the price. So we're talking like $340 versus $165 base model per base model. Obviously, the processor performance is the big thing. But what you do get, 1240 by 1080 OLED at 3.92 inches. It is sort of a weird, almost 1:1, but not quite display ratio on the Neo DMG. And for 4.3 content, that means about 3.7 inches of display area, which is about 14.7% smaller than the 4-inch display area that you would see on the 406V. So that's something to consider if you're primarily playing 4.3 systems. But for 8.7, if you do want to run Super Nintendo at 8.7 or 1.1 systems, you're looking at about a 3.8-inch display area versus only 3.6 inches on the 406V. So that contest actually favors the Neo DMG. So I think you could make an educated decision on which system fits you better based on A, what your budget is, and B, what type of systems you play, and maybe C, whether OLED's important. Of course, Neo DMG also only has one joystick and that touchpad. It remains to be seen whether that touchpad is any good. And that's really it. That's it. That's the powerful vertical space. Now, you can step down to the budget model like a 40XXV. It's a similar size. It's worse resolution. It's worse performance. But if you want 4-inch and you don't want to pay the price, then that's probably still the best option in the space. 40XXV, we're talking $67, which is less than half the price of the 406V. If you're only going to play up to PS1 and 64 kind of era, and you're not as big of a screen snob as me, then you know what? save your money and go buy that. Horizontal comparison is going to be a much harder argument, especially with the Retroid Pocket Mini on the horizon. That's OLED and a reasonable performance bump over the T820. If you prefer horizontal, then forget the 406V, forget the Ionita DMG. The Retroid Pocket Mini is probably going to be the one to get if you're okay with that 3.7-inch screen size. That being said, do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think the 406V is important because of what it means for other Anbernic handhelds? Do you think that it's a winner of its own right if you're a vertical fan and you don't want to spend over $300 and you want to play some PS2 and GameCube? Yeah, I can recommend this, and I think you should go pick it up if that is what you are into. If you want something a little bit more compact, a little bit cheaper, slimmer size than the 40XXV or other 3.5-inch handhelds like the Miyoo Mini Plus, the bazillion different variations of the 3.5XXHV 2024, 2023 SPG, HE, HG, ABCD, EFG, HH, KLMP that Anbernic has released, then you can go buy one of those too. So yeah, I think that's really it. Screen, awesome. Sticks, awesome. A little bit ugly, halfway comfortable, hits the mark for the price. That's the Anbernic RG406V. Thanks and happy gaming.